Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is Cosmere Conversations. Hello, all you lovely Cosmere friends. We have a Brandon update for you. It has been a crazy time to be a Cosmere fan the last month or so.
With that, we should also say, if you are a new listener, welcome.
Because
we're so glad that you found
so many
us.
people, that have come in from the last couple of weeks as the Kickstarter fame has rocketed us to the more mainstream.
Yeah, as our funny little corner of the internet somehow became splashed across the New York Times and CNBC.
That's true. We should prepare ourselves for more official Cosmere fans coming in, just like, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
I need to know these things.
What's up, y'all? I feel like we should state for the record that we're recording on a different day than usual. So if there's a weird energy, that's why.
It's late Friday night instead of early Sunday morning.
Very different vibe.
I think what a lot of the people coming in may be interested in is the most recent announcements that have come from the Dragonsteel camp.
We're going to start with the first two of the 4 secret projects that have been revealed to us. The first is entitled, first we should stop because there are people out there who are going 100% spoiler free. They want to open their Kickstarter boxes knowing absolutely nothing. If that is you, fast forward like 30 seconds to 1 minute.
Because we're hashtag all spoilers all the time. This is the hashtag that I invented.
Slight spoilers.
No. See, I can do whatever I want with the hashtag all spoilers. Every episode says hashtag all spoilers, so I can do whatever I want at any time.
Well, we've already clarified that we are not reading the preview chapters. However, the title of the first secret project is Tress of the Emerald Sea, and it is described as being a 100,000 word Hoid parable, including Aethers. So glad we just did that Aethers episode.
That's true. We have a full hour on Aether of Night and what Aethers could mean in the Cosmere. We now know that Brandon, with Tress of the Emerald Sea, his secret project, has been including the Aethers.
Like really the formal introduction of Aethers into the Cosmere. So very exciting. I'm excited to see what remains from what we saw in Aether of Night and what has changed since then.
That is kind of the big question mark that we had within our Aether of Night episode, was what parts of this story that is not canon will be incorporated in. And it seems like Tress of the Emerald Sea is going to be that real introduction, other than just casual mention into the Cosmere of what Aethers mean and how they are used, with the other caveat that it is about everyone's favorite Cosmere character, Hoid.
Well, it's not about Hoid, but it's from his perspective. He is telling this story as he does the other parables.
A lot of Hoid parables, so we'll just have mini episodes breaking down.
You can always go back and listen to our previous Hoid parable episodes. Secret project number 2 is entitled The Frugal Wizard's Guide for Surviving Medieval England.
Now, we actually know that of the 4 secret projects, only 3 of them will be Cosmere books.
Yes.
And this one
is the non-Cosmere one of the 4.
Because Brandon has described this secret project as a time travel tourism book, or a time traveling Jason Bourne. Now, for those of you who are not fans of Jason Bourne, it's awesome. You should probably be fans of it. But
Brandon has said that he is taking this trope and he feels like he is doing something slightly different, slightly new with it. So if you typically do not like, amnesia situations, maybe give this one a try.
I guess that was the great introduction to Jason Bourne. For those who are unfamiliar with Jason Bourne, he was a trained assassin who then had amnesia about his backstory and his history. I'm feeling that the amnesia, even if it's not called that, will be time traveling oriented. Like, because you
just want everything to be about time travel.
Everything is about time travel. I mean, this is described as time travel tourism.
I'm just saying they could be unrelated.
That is, I guess, true. They could be unrelated, but I think it's going to be like a manifestation of the time travel.
Maybe he has
that you,
like
lose some
brain
memory.
trauma, and the brain trauma allows him to travel through time.
That's a great reversal of the situation.
Magic through trauma.
Magic through trauma, just like our Stormlight Archive.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a really good call. And I'm going to reserve my...
That's my guess.
That's a good guess.
Throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, that's solid. Well done.
Now, for the meat of the episode, we are diving into some recent, as in 2022, words of Brandon. It's been a hot minute since we did a Word of Brandon episode. These are always really popular. We know that you, the listeners, love them. So here we are with some words of Brandon for you.
So let's get it started. Let's go to everyone's favorite, Brandon Sanderson, and the words that he says. The first, from Mr. Cargo Pants. Which
Is
could
this
be me.
Secretly you?
Yeah, alter ego me. Thank you for insulting me while I was going to do it. It's better when you undercut yourself, but thank you for introducing the fact that cargo pants are amazing and this may or not be me. Quote, I'm thinking on using a Merewell flower in a tattoo soon, but after searching, I can't decide which flower resembles the most. If you have thought about it, which would be your decision?
And one of the artists, actually, Ben McSweeney, answered this question saying, there's a canon design forthcoming at some point soon. It became important enough to make something of it. End quote.
And the reason we included this one...
Wow.
Yeah. Why is it...
It's important enough that right now they need to canonize it. I think this is a big hint for the Lost Metal, which is forthcoming.
That is a great call. And I believe that the design influences of both Scadrial and Rashar are going to be really significant. We've already seen the updating of the Radiant emblems to become what I would call like a little bit more futuristic. And they have like a space age design.
Dragonsteel is calling them space age.
Exactly. And so like I feel as if maybe the Merewell flower will be included in some of the space age Scadrial things.
That's interesting. I don't think they would change the symbol for Scadrial.
I think for Scadrial overall, just for like I'm thinking that maybe like in the space age, the Merewell flower is important as a symbol.
Oh, I'm thinking like the flower that grows out of the ground is important.
Gotcha.
Like not as a symbol, as a real thing.
That is a totally different aspect and maybe really important. We know a lot of flowers across the Cosmere have some magical significance. And I've always questioned about like, what's going on with this flower? Like,
Are you talking about the Tears of Edgley?
I am mentioning the Tears of Edgley from Nalthis, but I do think that like it is interesting that the Merewell flower is called out so specifically and is so important.
It's obviously named after Mare.
Yes, but then like recreated from the memory that Mare had by Harmony to exist in the new Scadrian world. And so that as both a real plant, one created by Harmony, and as a symbol, I think can be important going forward in the future of the Scadrian Cosmere.
Next question comes from Virgil Fromage. And they say, quote, I hope this is just one more tool in Brandon's arsenal for getting adaptations funded. He's talking about the Kickstarter here. And allowing him to be a big hand in what they look like. I mean, what studio can ignore the author of the largest Kickstarter campaign of all time? End quote.
Brandon Sanderson's response is, quote, this is a big point that I think is really relevant. I've been holding out on adaptations lately. until I can be absolutely certain that the deal I'm getting gives me a lot of creative influence and power. Maybe not final cut, but more power than your average author, and certain assurances about what can't be changed narratively. One of the goals for this Kickstarter was secretly to make Hollywood pay attention. I had no idea how far we'd go, but what has happened here will make things over there easier and will influence the strength of my negotiating position. End quote.
Woo!
This is probably one of the best looks at the process of creation from Brandon's perspective in regards to his non-literary works.
Yeah.
His broader vision.
Yeah.
He's specifically calling out Hollywood here.
Well, and this Kickstarter has just really highlighted for me how avant-garde, how like ahead of his time, how brave, and like, I hate to use this overused word, but Brandon is kind of a maverick.
Oh, a maverick. I love...
in terms of like both book publishing and the ways that he engages with the traditional publishing medium, which he does and he supports. But then he also has these really strong feelings and ideas and opinions about the things that can improve about the way that we produce and market books and all of the things that go along with that, the way that he interacts with his fans, and then extending to the way that he is engaging with other mediums to tell his stories as well.
This is a really interesting point that I don't know if we are necessarily the experts to speak on, but the connection between the literary world and the Hollywood, or we'll just like broader say like the entertainment community, where there's so much cross coordination and the fandom of one piece of work, in this case Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, but in other cases, The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, the Witcher series, and so on and so forth, with all of the different aspects that we've seen over the last decade, dating all the way back to Star Wars as like the original kind of like generating a self-contained fandom that was like feeding itself energy and building upon itself. Brandon has something here that is that powerful and is that potent in terms of its ability to like continually generate energy and enthusiasm. And he's proved that now with this Kickstarter. And I think that when he's declaring, as he is with this statement, that part of this is done purposefully to strengthen his negotiating position, to give him strength over the creative decisions, which is always like the number one thing, from George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones to other creators like John Green and their works being adapted.
I mean, and I would say like Brandon seems to have an even more sort of passionate position about this. Again, even in the way that he is in relationship with his current book publishers and wanting to release things like leather-bound versions and like wanting to include different unique things with his, traditionally published works. I've been listening to a lot of his live streams lately, so I'm like very up on Brandon's view on the world. I'm an expert now. And he has just been talking a lot about how he over time has been advocating for a lot of sort of unique things. And because he's so tapped into his fan community and he kind of has an understanding of what people want and what will entice readers and push sales, basically, like how can we make this a more valuable thing for people to buy? Because as we know, publish in print is a dying art, supposedly. We've proven all of them wrong by funding a bunch of books in nice print editions at millions and millions of dollars. But things like that, he's really been advocating for and fighting for over the course of his career, which is why, in his words, he has a really unique relationship with his publishers, in that he is not like completely locked into his publishers. He kind of has his own editor, has his own people on his side working on things. Obviously, he has his Dragonsteel company in addition to working with Tor and other publishers.
Yes, his long-term publisher is the company Tor, which is world-renowned and does all of the distribution. But Dragonsteel, as his independent creation company, really, and as the company that is going to be most directly involved in all of the different adaptations of his work, I think is really important. And it's just a testament to how tapped in Brandon is to the multiple dimensions of creation in this literary fantasy world, because it's not just about bringing the words to the page.
Right.
Clearly, he is one of the most prolific authors like on planet Earth. I don't know if that's a factual statement, but it's like him and L. Ron Hubbard, who is like the famous like 1950s era sci-fi author who then also created Scientology. But just like wrote a nonsensical amount of sci-fi works. And Brandon is, giving him a run for his money. But I think that when you are at the forefront of that type of creative flow and creative energy, and you see all of this potential that's basically just like waiting to be tapped, and like looking for specific things, looking for different series.
I mean, and obviously he's right, you know,
100%. Like he has
that's like really what this Kickstarter proves is just like he's right.
And that when he is creating that purposefully and doing those things purposefully, it gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah.
And clearly we're fans, but the stepping stones that are needed to vault it into that next category, it's really large. Like when you try to do a comparison of, cinematic universes, you're talking about DC and Marvel and then Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like those are the big three, and everything else is playing to catch up for those things. Like Lord of the Rings a little bit, but everybody knows that like it's kind of fallen off since the original trilogy. Like nobody's like the Hobbits are the greatest thing ever. But the kind of focus that Brandon has is basically setting us up long term to have the Cosmere as part of our life. And I love that.
It certainly makes me feel better about getting old.
Because the older we get, the more Cosmere there is.
There's always something to look forward to.
Let's go over to the next one from very nice name 16, who says, quote, "You write a lot of immortals in your books. How do you think about people living on large time frames like that and how that affects the way they think and act compared to ordinary people? And also say, like, what's the 10,000-year-old compared to a 2,000-year-old or to a 300-year-old?" End quote.
And Brandon's response is kind of long, but I think it's really interesting. Quote, "This is actually something I've dedicated a lot of thought to. I think fantasy and science fiction, one of the things it does well is explore human experiences that aren't possible in contemporary or realistic fiction. And so there are a lot of people out there searching for the key to human immortality. And what would it be like? How would we deal with it? These are questions that are interesting to me, and doing a story on a 10,000-year timescale lets me play around with that. How do I approach this? By gut and instinct, just trying different things out. No human being's experience is identical to another human being's experience. So I figure no immortal's experience will be identical to other immortals' experiences. And so I can have a lot of different responses. I can base it partially on the magic system and how they were made immortal. And then that lets me play with different experiences, like the things the heralds are going through, Hoyd hasn't gone through. Some of the sort of degradation that's happening with their souls is unique. Not wholly unique, but individual to the experiences that they're having. And I play with those differently than I play with someone who's been elevated to holding near infinite power in one of the shards and how their experience goes. And I can't really say exactly how I'm going to do this with everybody. It's just going to be different for each character in each situation. End quote.
What a response. I think that this is one of the hardest things to do as an author or just a creator in general, but the thing that we all know is how it feels to be like us and to have the experience like a normal human, where you are raised, you find a sense of self, you grow into an adult, you then grow older and maybe reproduce, but then eventually die on a scale of something like 75 years. And that's very familiar to everyone. When you then extend that out to 300, 2,000, 10,000 years, that experience becomes almost so much more unique, like in a way that Brandon is talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in a way, you're right. In a way, I mean, none of us knows what that experience is like because we're in the middle of it. You know, I don't know what it's like to live a 75-year span and like possibly reproduce because I haven't done those things.
Yes.
And so the concept that even on a 75-year timeline, we live many different lives.
Yes.
You know, we are sort of reborn into different versions of ourselves throughout our lives, depending on the things that befall us. And then multiplying that on a 10,000 year span, to me, that concept becomes even more mind-boggling to imagine a soul that is that old, that has been sort of rebirthed so many times and yet has not died, and to have these sort of different versions of yourself stacked on top of each other. Plus, you know, whatever, like magical things situations that are at play.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's kind of the crazy X factor that we don't necessarily know, but we do understand that the heralds are experiencing some sort of magical malady or a magical decay that other characters like Thydakar or Vasher have not quite yet experienced because they're on a different time scale.
Yeah, I like that this is confirmed and in this word of Brandon, that the experiences that these different characters are going through are different. Just to get that like confirmation that these are different situations and different scenarios for these different characters. I also just love that he is so open and does make each situation unique, because although, as you're saying, we are all familiar with the sort of quote unquote typical, you know, life of a human being, we are all individuals and we all have our own unique experiences. And so applying that, even in this circumstance, I think is really cool.
Even to the shards, even to the vessels that are wielding such power that they are functionally, you know, just gods of the universe.
Like slivers.
Yes.
You know?
Because that we just have such a range of experience for our long-lived characters throughout the Cosmere. And I think that it's definitely something that Brandon clearly is interested in, and something that he returns to often in his stories. Not just the long-lived characters, but also the afterlife of characters. Think of the shades in Silence in the Forest of Hell, and how they're like not able to leave this world. Kelsey or Thydakar experiencing something similar about wanting to like remain connected to the world, and like how is that different from something like a shard when they are so far beyond a normal individual or a normal cognitive shadow.
A vessel, you mean?
Yes, a vessel, you know, so far beyond these like normal realms. Even if there's a little bit of magic or a little bit of like afterlife stuff going on, I then love that we can keep applying different scales, but they're also still individuals. And that's the really key part, is that Odium or Rasa, the vessel, is a specific individual and will carry
and that,
the weight.
And his like unique individuality is going to have an effect on the way the way that he handles being a vessel, the way that he handles being so old, the way that the shard behaves. Exactly.
We've gotten this introduced a little bit with Harmony, but of course that situation was different because there were two vessels holding two shards and now there's one. Where we're going to see this most directly is clearly the difference between Rasa Odium and Taravangian Odium, where two vessels are holding the same shard, and like how do they use and manifest differently?
Yeah, totally.
Is going to be really, really interesting. I love that Brandon is so connected to this because it does seem to be a key part of the Cosmeres. Like, how are these long-lived characters experiencing their different long-lived lives?
Let's go to a nice short one next. Question: where was Ivory the night that Shallan stole the Soulcaster?
Brandon says, quote, Rapho, end quote.
No answer, but great question.
Very
Where
intriguing.
was Ivory? And just as a reminder, Ivory is Yasna's spren, who presumably, probably should have been hanging around.
At least a little bit more watchful of what was going on.
Yeah.
But we also have to assume that Ivory and the Inkspren and their relationship to the Cryptics, because they don't seem that far apart. Obviously, they share some radiant powers, but I think that the Cryptics and the Inkspren have, from my perspective, more in common than a lot of the other spren that we have so far seen.
I can see that.
And therefore, I'm wondering if there was a little bit, not necessarily communication or any such
You think
nonsense.
they have like a blind spot or something?
No.
I mean, Shallan wasn't even bonded at that time, so...
But what if...
I don't know if the Cryptics would have come into play.
Yeah, that's, I guess, but she was definitely being investigated by the Cryptics at that point and had already bonded the Cryptic from before.
Oh, that's a good point, actually. Dang it, I forget about
Always
Shallan's
testament.
freaky history.
But I think that where we might see this come into play is, like Pattern has kept secrets from Shallan, other spren could be keeping secrets from their radiance.
Oh, like Ivory saw it and didn't tell Yasna?
Exactly. Because the spren have different motivations than the humans necessarily. Like, some of the spren are motivated to get more spren bonded to humans.
Yeah.
Like, that's their primary role, or what they see their role as, is like a forebearer of more spren bonding more humans. And if, for example, Ivory thought that it was beneficial that Shallan be bonded to a Cryptic, maybe he was just like, yeah, I see the Cryptic over there, and I'm going to let this situation happen and play out. Because I'm not saying it's a guaranteed. I'm not saying there's any type of evidence to back this up.
I'm not with that theory.
Brandon says Rapho, and therefore I get to speculate based on what his Rapho means.
Okay. Next question comes from Potato, and it's very...
Or Potato.
Or Potato. It's very fun. They ask, quote, what kind of attractions would be in an in-universe Cosmere amusement park? End quote.
A, excellent question.
Such a good question.
B, Brandon Sanderson's response, quote, I don't know. If I were going to come up with an in-universe one, I would try to build it in a modern or future era where you could use the powers in interesting ways. Like a roller coaster that goes in and out of speed bubbles could be interesting in that it is a dimension of experience that we can't have in our world. And so I would write those kinds of things in so that reading about it would be more interesting. That's how I approach things. The magic system and the world building would be relevant to how the theme park runs. End quote.
Love it.
Sounds very fun.
A roller coaster going in and out of
zipping through the speed bumps and just boom, 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 boom. Sounds great. I feel like there's so much that goes along with the manipulation of time that we don't necessarily need to get into. But one of them is specifically the shifting of, it's a red shift or blue shift, depending on the direction in which the time you are manipulating is going. And there are basically properties of physics that are changing as you are shifting through time. And so a roller coaster through that, basically like watching colors shift, watching the direction of light shift, you could theoretically get like rainbows and different types of, prism-like manipulations of light as you were busting back and through different types of speed bubbles. So there's just a bunch of fun stuff that you could play around with once you unlock, as you would need a unchained bondsmith to do maybe, all of the different powers in the Cosmere.
Next question comes from SMG 9000. They ask, I really enjoyed Arcanum Unbounded. Do you see yourself releasing a collection of short stories like that again? And have other authors approached you about writing a short story in the Cosmere? What other author would you enjoy seeing tackle a story in the Cosmere, and why?
Brandon responds, quote, I think an Arcanum Unbounded 2 is someday inevitable, but it depends on how many novellas I get around to writing, or short pieces. I think it is inevitable. We already have one in Dawnshard that would definitely go in it, and we will have Horneater in a year or two, and maybe someday we will have the Lopen story that could fit in there.
Okay, stop. This is the first I've ever heard of a Lopen short story.
The Horneater story was like
we knew about.
Hard confirmed.
Yeah.
But now we're just like tossing in a little bit of the Lopen.
So just wanted to flag that. And then Brandon goes on to say that right now, the only person that is authorized to write in the Cosmere except me is Isaac. And he is working away on his first stab at a Cosmere story. So if that works, potentially there's a chance for more. He goes on to say that the Skyward novellas have been really well received, and so that has given him hope for doing things like that in the Cosmere later. But let's talk about this story being written by Isaac, because it's kind of exciting and it's kind of new.
We definitely have never seen anything like it in the Cosmere, as Brandon clearly is stating. Isaac's the only one who is allowed to write. And Isaac Stewart is the lead designer for Dragonsteel.
VP of visual things. He has a long new title. Congrats, Isaac, on your promotion.
And his story is taking a tiny tidbit from one of the broadsheets during Era 2 of Mistborn, where a side character, like more than a side character.
Yeah, like a bit character.
Very excellent. Like that. Nothing more than a throwaway mention.
Basically just a name.
And that name is
Nikki Savage, also known as Nicelle Sauvage.
I wanted you to say the French version so that I could just go with the brutal Nikki Savage. Nikki Savage is an adventurer similar to Alamancer Jack in some respects.
We don't know too much about her. We just hear about her, I think, only from Alamancer Jack's perspective. We're going to do a whole episode on the broadsheets before the next Mistborn book, so we'll dive into it then. But I think we actually have a WOI, a Word of Isaac.
There it is.
About his book.
Inside this
WOI?
There it is.
Instead of a WOB? We have a WOI.
Isaac says, quote, been getting back into my book, writing Nikki Savage, boatload of mummies. That won't be on the front of the book, just the back of the book. It's basically Death on the Nile mixed with The Mummy, mixed with King Kong, with no King Kong. Set in the Mistborn universe with a side character that's mentioned in a newspaper.
I'm sold. That's an amazing description.
Put that on the poster. That's good for me. Like, if you need more, get out of here.
That's the back of the book blurb. That's it. Done. Slap it on a cover. I'm in.
It can be the front of the book, Isaac. It can be the back of the book. Okay, so soft title is Boatload of Mummies. And clearly, Isaac is taking this broadsheet mentioned character, Nikki Savage, who we think is kind of like an Indiana Jones-esque adventurer.
Lara Croft.
Ooh, Lara Croft. Yes, a very excellent female version, but got that vibe.
The ambiance.
Ooh, ambiance. I like it. So many great words.
Friday night is just bringing us all the good vocabulary.
Where Isaac is able to take the story and where it leads us, we know nothing about. But we know it's out there. And we also know that Brandon has specifically mentioned the Skyward Flight series, where there were currently 3 novellas, soon will be 4 novellas, all mostly written or co-written by an author named Jancy Patterson. I think that this introduction of Isaac's story and the success of Jancy's introduction into the Skyward Flight is simply a opening salvo for the possibility of Cosmere guest writers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Brandon is right to keep it narrowly focused and to be very careful about who he invites into writing voice for the Cosmere. I would be really excited to read this book by Isaac because I know that he is part of the Dragonsteel team. Like, I feel I trust him to write these worlds that we know and love because he is like fully immersed in it. So I think Brandon is like going about this in the right way, could lead to some really cool stuff.
Could lead to a lot of cool things that we otherwise wouldn't get. And that's the defining trait that Brandon has continually mentioned.
Yeah.
Is that he's very much interested in expanding in ways that we wouldn't otherwise see.
Right.
And
because
so,
he's only one man.
Exactly.
And despite the amount that he writes, he can only write so much.
And so I love the concept that other people can be coming into the Cosmere to provide
authors.
Trusted authors only. I think that what we have here from a couple of questioners.
Yeah, we also have someone asking, and I didn't like fully see this thread, but someone asked about something entitled The Arcanist, and Isaac said that this is a working title for, quote, something that's white sand and still has that same cadence. So it feels like, I mean, calling it The Arcanist is good because it will be Chris's story. We follow Kenton in this one. I think the back half to this story would need to be Chris going back to Darkside and figuring out what to do with the Emperor there and saving her town. The status? I have a lot of notes for that.
Brandon says he's writing Boatload of Mummies right now. So the status is finish Boatload of Mummies, release Boatload of Mummies, decide what he wants to do next in the Cosmere. Because Isaac's got the do what he would like in the Cosmere ticket.
Isaac says, the one that I'm really excited and might wind up doing after this, and I'm not going to give too much on it, but I love the title of it, but it would be set on Scadrial, and it's called Son of Bones. And that's what I would really like to write after Boatload of Mummies, if it turns out okay. End quote. This whole, exchange. Okay, one, I needed to flag that The Arcanist would be Chris's story. I'm in. Isaac, please write this for me. I would love this so much. But just the idea that Isaac, as a fan of the Cosmere who knows all of the stories and who has a list of stories that he wants to be told in the Cosmere, is able to tell them and basically turn his fan fiction into real life canon stuff is amazing. I'm here for it. I'm totally behind you, Isaac.
I mean, he's got 3 ideas. The first starts with a mix between the Death on the Nile and the Mummy. So I'm down for all of Isaac's idea.
Duh.
He's got a clear ticket in the Cosmere from Brandon, and he's got a clear ticket in the Cosmere from me about whatever he wants to do. They all seem great. I'm super interested. I'm surprised, though, that Brandon would in any way give up the story of Chris. Because Chris, to me, seems like such a major Cosmere character that it seems like Brandon would really want to write that.
I imagine it would be something kind of like the co-writer situation with Jancy, where Brandon sort of writes the outline. Because I think he probably knows what Chris's story is. And I imagine that Isaac, being both an employee of Brandon's and one of his closest friends, probably knows what Chris's story is already. And so with that outline, he would just be doing the dialogue and the narration of the story, would be my guess.
An excellent guess. And now let's go to another word of Brandon specifically about Chris. Adele RD asks, quote, what Radiant Order would Chris be in? End quote.
There's a very long response from Brandon that I will not completely read. However, He goes on to describe that Chris could fit into several different Radiant orders. Brandon says that she's most obviously an Else Caller, but that he doesn't want the Else Callers to be the quote-unquote scholarly order. And he takes great lengths to emphasize that he doesn't want the orders to be like Harry Potter houses. So he doesn't want them to be exclusive. He, doesn't want like only brave people go in this order and only, smart ones go in this order. He says, quote, I want to kind of run these based on the truths that you're speaking, the oaths that you're speaking, and what those mean to you, what you're trying to do. And some of those aren't going to be archetypical. The whole idea of protecting or things like that. You could make really good argument for Chris as a Lightweaver. I could make a pretty good argument for Chris in Truth Watcher. You could make good arguments for a good half of the orders for any given character. And that's how I want it to be. End quote.
I love this idea, and I think that this is probably one of the most important things to take away for any character that we're looking at, is that the orders are not exclusive, they're not supposed to be restrictive, and any one of our characters, if they had a slightly different trajectory, could probably end up in a different order.
Yeah, and we've talked about this a lot, especially in terms of the Windrunners and the idea that there's like different ways of protecting, and that oath or that idea is not always going to look the same depending on the individual knight. Yeah,
Kaladin and Teft being the clear examples where Kaladin's very outwardly focused.
Sure.
And Teft is often very inwardly focused.
But then like Lopin has a completely different
100%
interaction and interpretation of the same oaths, which is always something that I've really loved. There is a little bit I sort of was confused that he was like contrasting this to Harry Potter houses, because the whole thing about the Harry Potter houses is that like Harry puts on the hat and decides that he wants to be in Gryffindor, like he's not actually like...
I think he's not a true fan of Harry Potter. The Harry Potter nerds are very much out in arms, and they're like, the wizard decides the house.
I was like, well, actually, the whole like thing about Harry Potter was that he chose what house he wanted to be in, basically, which is kind of what Brandon is saying here. Is like, look, the knight sort of gets to choose. Like, they might want to be in the Elsecaller house, even though they could very well also be in the Lightweaver house or whatever.
And so, to me, that indicates that all of our Radiants that we know, Shallan and Kaladin and so forth, are very much a product of their environment and their situation, and with different direction they could have ended up in different orders or different...
See, but I think it's more than that, of just like life circumstances led you here. Like, I think there's an element of choice. I feel like when you say that it's due to life circumstances, that makes it feel like, inevitable, no matter what. Because of the path that Kaladin is on, he would have been a Windrunner. But if his life had just been different, he could have been different.
I think that Kaladin is one of the hardest ones to do, because he's obviously supposed to be like the most pure
I don't know
character.
what other order Kaladin would be.
But I do think that an example like Shallan is probably better. Is like clearly Shallan the scholar could have been
an Elsecaller.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
and
totally.
could have gone down the exact same path as Yasna, but she's not the same as Yasna, and she has an interest in scholarship, yes, but is not the same intensity that Yasna is when it comes to...
I think she's just like different intensity.
That's true.
She approaches scholarship in a different way.
And I think what we see with Brandon's statement is that the concept he wants to stay away from is an exclusivity among the orders, where it's like, you can't be in here because you're not XYZ.
Like, you don't belong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which he's always been, I think, really vocal about, especially with the Knights Radiant Order quiz. I've seen a lot of people taking that quiz recently on the online forums as new fans have started to come into the fandom over the last couple of weeks. There's been this like uptick in Knights Radiant Order quiz results being posted, which is awesome. Again, welcome all y'all new people. But one of the things with that quiz, Brandon was very, very clear about was like, look, take the quiz, see what you get, but like, you can pick. If you don't like your result, just like pick the order that you want to be in. You have a choice.
At this time, too, we don't even have all the information about all the different
True,
orders.
true.
So it's like, you can definitely pick. Like, there's not any limitations right now whatsoever. There's one you can basically just make up entirely. You can be whatever you
there
want.
is not.
I think that what we have here is a great example of the diversity that is possible throughout the different Knights Radiant orders and the way that they are manifesting on Roshar. Because one of the key things to me, and one of the interesting things to me, is the way that Venli and her powers and her spren are manifesting, and the way that the gem heart that exists seemingly inside of a lot of Rosharian creatures and Rosharian native creatures interacts with the spren bond, which is not exclusive to humans, but we like kind of see it as exclusive to humans.
The Nahel bond.
The Nahel bond, exactly. Like, we know that clearly because of Venli and because of other characters, is not exclusive, but it is introduced as like a kind of exclusive thing, something that was part of human history.
Sure.
And I love the concept that like, no, we need to break down those ideas.
Yeah.
Is what Brandon is clearly articulating here.
Totally. Breaking barriers.
Let's do a quick one. Let's just do a random kind of like factoid here, because
Great.
I love this question from Abject Bed 3833, who says, quote, when Rabaniel said for Edo's sake, was she referring to Ba Edo Mishram or Edonausium?
Brennan says Adonausium.
Which probably changes the pronunciation, or at least for me. I would say Ba Edo Mishram, and I would say Adonausium. That's just me. Everyone has their different pronunciation.
Yeah.
But fun little turn of phrase in this situation.
Interesting that Rabaniel apparently knows about Adonausium.
And says it as
in like a reverential term.
Well, to the point, like, when you're saying for Edo's sake, for God's sake, you're already at the point of like a comfort with God, where
totally
you're not that reverent. You're kind of a little bit more detached from like the most fearful version of like a God figure, and you're just like, we can't say his name, we can't draw his image, all the kind of like restrictive elements of interpreting God. When you're saying something like, you're giving him a nickname, Adonausium is Edo in this situation. It's a little bit more casual, which to me says like, this is a long-term experience that maybe Rabaniel has had outside the shards.
It seems weird to me that Rabaniel would have been alive when Adonausium was around.
I agree. I don't think that's like a canon thing that we can say across the board.
Maybe this is a mythology that has been like passed down to her from her ancestors or something. I mean, we have some hints that Adonausium visited Roshar before Adonausium was shattered and left some of its investiture on the planet. We have not heard anything about there already being higher life forms like the singers on Roshar when Adonausium visited.
Yeah.
So that could be like a yes or a no.
But
this makes that question even more interesting.
To me, it kind of makes it almost seem as if the singers did have some connection to the vessel that was Adonausium.
Oh, I mean, we don't know that Adonausium had a vessel. It just means that it's more likely that there were singers on Roshar when Adonausium visited and left some of its investiture.
Exactly. Whereas before we thought it was kind of all smaller life forms, figments of Roshar, little spren here and there, and then
probably just plants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I originally figured.
Spren came from that investiture that was left.
But the concept that the singer culture had passed down enough of Adonausium's myth and memory
story
to Rabaniel maybe indicates that there was some cognizant life form, sapient life form that is absorbing what was happening when Adenalsium, god of the universe, showed up.
Maybe that's what makes Rayshadium. Maybe Rayshadium were like the other life form on Rashar when Adenalsium visited. And that's how they became like extra intelligent or something.
It's really interesting. I have this question deeply about the gem heart, and like maybe that was an Adenalsium thing that he added the gem heart to things on Rashar. But
I don't know. I feel like the gem heart would be more naturally occurring for just like beings that evolve on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And then Adenalsium comes, leaves some investiture, which creates Spren.
Okay.
And like then there evolves a relationship where now the Spren and the indigenous beings realize that they can form a relationship.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm actually like throwing myself through a loop here because now I'm going to go the complete opposite direction and say that the Spren actually came first.
You don't think there were any living beings on Rashar?
No, that there were definitely living beings,
Oh.
but they did not have gem hearts.
Oh, and then they like evolved to accommodate Spren?
Exactly. Adenalsium shows up, the Spren show up, and then the gem hearts grow because of the...
You think they had regular biological hearts and then somehow created a stone inside of them? I think that's hard to believe.
It's definitely hard to believe. Everything about Rashar is hard to believe for someone who doesn't live on Rashar. But
It makes more sense that all of the beings that were already there would naturally have these gem hearts.
But what was the gem heart for?
We don't actually know if Rayshadium have gem hearts.
But they have a Spren bond.
Just saying. They do have a Spren bond. We don't know if they have a gem heart. We know that singers, chasm fiends, I think chulls, we know for sure, and some of those other similar crustacean-like beings, they have gem hearts. It seems to make sense that that would occur naturally since it is occurring across different populations. It seems a far cry to assume that all of these populations would have evolved in the same exact way to accommodate Spren.
I agree with you in a certain respect, and I think that is a logical assumption. My question would be, what are they evolving for? Like, what is the gem heart for if not to adopt Spren? And so therefore,
it's just the way that they're made.
They're made for what? Every evolutionary advantage is an advantage for some reason.
It probably like pumps blood and stuff like our normal hearts.
Okay, so that would be an interesting thing.
It's just like doing its normal thing, and then when the Spren show up, they're like, actually, we can do something new with it.
Interesting. Okay, that's a different way of thinking about it than I was thinking about it, is that it's like solely a gem heart for Spren.
Right, it's just like an empty stone unless there's a Spren inside of it.
Exactly. And my question would be like, okay, if it is an empty stone, then the only reason that it exists is to adopt a Spren, then the Spren would have to be there first. And they grew to accept that Spren.
Well, listeners, tell us what you think. Which came first, the gem or the Spren?
An excellent query. Take us to the next question.
Gracie Moo asked, has the Dawn Shard that's different from the rest always been different?
Brandon says, quote, Rapho.
Dang it.
A good question.
Great question. We know that one of the 4 Dawn Shards is said to be different from the rest. That's a quote. We don't really know what that phrase means precisely. So I think this is a great question to sort of start getting at the heart of that. Has it always been different? We are no closer to knowing that answer, unfortunately.
It reminds me, though, of the shard that all we know about is that it, quote, wants to survive.
Yeah, hide and survive.
Exactly.
That is a very old word of Brandon at this point, though, that we don't necessarily know.
He hasn't mentioned
if
anything
it's like
updated
still, yeah.
Totally fine. And that's the caveat that we come to this situation with. Every word of Brandon can be completely nullified, completely destroyed, and every word of Brandon could potentially be a huge aspect of the Cosmere. To the next question, we have Kovadax1, who says, quote, You've hinted before that Hoyd is in reality much more self-interested than he is perceived to be, and walks a path you yourself said you probably would not condone. Yet at times we see him share touching personal moments with multiple characters, such as during Shallan's childhood or helping Kaladin through the several rough patches. Are these also to serve his own interest or goals, or are these genuine moments he shared with those individuals? End quote.
Wonderful question. Brandon says, quote, Hoyd is legitimately empathetic to the individual. This is how he is. He is very empathetic to people's problems, but in the grand scale, he is more self-interested than I think people are seeing and the fandom seeing him being. These things aren't mutually exclusive. He can be very empathetic to the problems that Shallan is going through, while at the same time understanding that if Roshar were destroyed but Odium were contained, then it meets his goals better than if other things were to happen. And in a moment of decision, like if he were to say, all right, you can sacrifice Roshar, Odium is contained forever, he would probably say yes, meaning that all these people that he's empathizing with would be dead. And that's what I'm saying right there when I say sacrifice Roshar. Not that this would happen necessarily, I'm not saying that, but, given that kind of impossible false dichotomy, that's one of the places where his mind and heart is. Depending on your axis and things like this, he has, like many of us, a complex morality. But those are legitimate moments of empathy on his part where he is trying to make their lives better. But it doesn't mean that every motivation that he has is purely altruistic or purely aligned with what the people on Roshar would want. End quote.
An insightful bit of Hoyd philosophy there from Brandon. I think that this is not just a Hoyd question, but kind of like a personal question across the board of what is your personal moral philosophy and where does that hold and what does that mean?
Yeah, I think this is just like such an interesting philosophical question that Brandon brings up. And Hoyd is still such a mystery. And one of the things that I love about these books that we talk about quite a bit is the complexity that Brandon introduces and the fact that he challenges his readers to be able to hold these quote unquote opposing things in mind at the same time, to be able to wrap our minds around the fact that Hoyd is a truly empathetic person that is, has compassionate feelings towards these characters. And also would let them and all of their loved ones and every single person on this planet die if he felt like it aligned with his greater goals.
Yes, the ends definitely justify the means. When it comes to Hoyd's philosophy, he would clearly sacrifice all of Roshar, all of the people that he's empathizing with.
But I think that this also sort of points to, and what Brandon is pointing to here is that we all have our own lines like this, right? Like we all have the point at which, even though we feel compassion and love and empathy for a thing or a person or a circumstance, there's a point at which something else becomes more important.
Yeah. And just kind of like your decision needs to be made. I think the difference between some characters is when they are able to be flexible. And this is always like a personal morality decision about, okay, I'm making a decision because I believe that containing Odium is really important. But how willing am I to admit that I could be wrong, that my decisions that I'm making could be wrong?
Sure.
And how willing to admit am I that I'm just like another flawed aspect of this universe?
Oh.
And
well, I think also like how willing am I to change my mind when presented with new information?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
like maybe this is his philosophy right now, but we would see in the future if he is presented with some kind of, I don't know what could be new information to Hoyd, but presumably there's something
there's
that
one
maybe
thing
would change the way that he feels.
Yeah, there's one thing that seems to be pushing to the forefront from Rhythm of War, which is a relationship with Yasin. I think that there's something from The Traveler, episode 24 of this podcast or something, like a long time ago, we read The Traveler specifically, that hints at Hoyd having some type of relationship with an individual that was lost.
There's actually, there's a few references throughout the Cosmere books to this person. It's unclear what the relationship is, if it's a lover or a child
family,
or something. There's some person that was important to Hoyd that he lost at some point in the past.
And is driving a lot of his decisions and maybe that personal philosophy that he has. What is a thing that could change it is maybe a new person that is filling that same void. I don't know if it is Yasna.
Yeah, I don't think that's been shown to be necessarily that important yet, but it could be in the future.
It would be really interesting, but at this point, I feel like we haven't even learned enough about Hoyd's motivations to see a reversal of his motivations, where it's all against our own expectations that we've built up.
I think we have to wait for Dragonsteel for that.
Yeah, we really need to better understand what Hoyd's philosophy is, and these little tidbits of information are just reminders that he very much is willing to see beyond the empathy he may feel for an individual for what he would consider, quote, greater good.
Sure.
That introduces lots of big problems in terms of philosophy. It immediately drops a bunch of problematic elements that have been debated multiple times over many thousands of years at this point.
Just watch The Good Place.
Exactly. Everyone can watch The Good Place and you would understand it. Get some Chidi Anagonia in here and he will instruct you on the different moral philosophies. I think we should move on to the next question.
Yeah, talking about potentially some friends of Hoyd. This question comes from NC Magic 97. Quote, dragons are often depicted as much more intelligent and or powerful than humans. Are dragons in the Cosmere better equipped to handle the power or psychological influence of becoming the vessel for a shard of Adonalsium?
Brandon says, quote, I would say that Rapho. That's not where I thought you were going to go with that, so I was planning to answer a different question. The one that you asked, I will say Rapho too. They are better suited toward long lifespans, which makes them... but I would not say that a dragon in the Cosmere is born more wise than a human, end quote. Brandon's certainly dancing around some things that he doesn't want to mention or talk about here, giving the Rapho out officially to this question of, are dragons in the Cosmere better equipped to handle the power or psychological influence?
I think it's interesting that he does say that they're better suited toward longer lifespans, especially when we just had that question about long lifespans in the Cosmere. It seems to me that if you are a being, okay, like we were talking about, in terms of us humans on Earth, we are used to conceiving of ourselves as a, 80 to 100 year lifespan being.
Very generous of you. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, we've got modern medicine.
You're a woman. Let's be honest. You guys live longer anyways, so you're all good.
I think only if we're married. Oh, no, actually, I think we live longer if we're actually not married. Yeah. I think it's the reverse. Men live longer if they're married and women live shorter if they're married.
It's so unfortunate. We just take right from you just to feed off you like a vampire.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. We'll go with that.
If you are a being that already is suited towards a longer lifespan, I do imagine that you would have at least marginally a better ability to handle a longer lifespan by being a shard.
Yeah,
but also the type of perspective that comes along with being a shard. Because I think my sense is that one of the things that is probably difficult and wearing on a person like Vasher or Kelsier or the Heralds about living so long is being able to wrap your mind around the perspective of so many years
Yeah.
having seen the world.
Eons, like
Right.
eras beyond your own. Whereas a
Yeah.
dragon would maybe be very comfortable with centuries or maybe even millennia
So
of
if
existence.
you already are like starting with that advantage, it seems like you would be. And maybe it's, a negligible difference, but it seems like they still would be at least a little bit better.
Well, we do think that the individual Frost, who is a dragon, and was in existence at the shattering of
Yeah.
Adonalsium,
Yeah.
and knew Hoyd at that moment.
Yeah.
And so that would suggest a many 1,000-year natural lifespan that Frost is rocking.
We don't necessarily have to say natural because he might be hanging out in the
Unnaturally.
cognitive realm, doing some weird like time dilation things.
There's lots of possibilities, but let's just say that they have a very long extended lifespan compared to humans. And I do think that that prepares you for long existence as a shard.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's just like a natural leg up. The question is, does that mean we should give some emphasis to our dragon shard vessels?
Oh.
Like
Cultivation.
a cultivation. Do they have a leg up on some of the other shards and their
Maybe that's why
perspective?
cultivation feels so comfortable, just
Exactly.
like biding her time.
Yeah, because her natural persona would be, I'm a dragon.
Yeah,
These
she's
are a
just
bunch
like,
of humans.
I'm
I'll
gonna
wait
be
you
here
out.
for decades.
Yeah, decades upon decades.
I can sit here. I'll just wait for y'all to kill yourselves.
Which is maybe a good bet for dragons most often. And so it would work out on the shard timeline as well. Lots of interesting things there.
Let's go to another interesting question from one of my favorites, Wind Punner.
Perfect.
Quote, is Shallan's mother invested / someone we know of, or just a woman who got involved with the Skybreakers? Did she ever get involved with the Ghost Bloods? End quote.
Brandon responds with, quote, very interesting. Very interesting questions. Raffo, end quote.
Thank you, Brandon, for that pattern inspired response.
Yeah, a attack of a response.
Interesting.
Clearly, this is a great question. It is cutting right to one of the key mysteries about Shallan's mother,
Yes.
and what are the unknown things that Shallan is still blocking from her own knowledge, or that she was never introduced to at all.
Shallan's mother is a huge question mark. We're actually thinking about doing a whole episode looking into what we know about Shallan's mom and some kind of wild theories about
There's a lot
Shallan's
of
mom.
wild theories. And
We
that's
have basically zero information, but there are some very complex theories. So that tells you something about the quality of the theories, but they are fun nevertheless.
yes, the less information we have, the crazier the theories get.
Okay, next question. I thought this one was really good. This comes from Rexozord, who says, was Gliss a Deadeye before being enlightened by Ja-Anat? End quote. So Gliss is Renarin's corrupted Spren. This person is asking if they were a Deadeye Sprenblade before they became corrupted.
Brandon responds with, quote, Raffo, good question. You may have to wait for a while to get answers to some of those questions. Sorry. And I'm not promising that I'll ever answer them. End quote.
No, I really want the answer to that question. I think that is fascinating.
Top tier question. It really is, once again, just like going right to the target of the key mysteries. This concept, though, of Ja-Anat being able to enlighten Deadeyes,
like resurrect the Deadeyes,
has a lot in common, I believe, with what is going on with Adolin and Maya's relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question. We have this huge mass of Deadeyes in the cognitive realm that we see in Rhythm of War. And then it's like, well, what is their future? What is going to happen to them? Can they just be rebonded by people? Does it need to be some type of process like what Adolin and Maya have experienced, where it's sort of a slower, more relationship-based thing. And I'm not necessarily convinced that Maya is going to, fully reanimate because of this bond.
Mm-hmm.
Or is there some other thing like Jeannot? I think this is just a really good speculation.
I actually think that this answers one of the key mysteries that was presented with Rhythm of War, because you had Maya reclaiming some of her sentience a little bit and her sense of self, but then you had this mass of Denai Spren that flocked towards, came towards lasting integrity, the home of the Honor Spren, and the center of Adolin and Maya and Shallan and all of this. Like, what was drawing all of the Denai to this location? What was bringing them in from where they seemingly were around the cognitive realm?
I can't remember if we get an answer about that in book. I don't think that we do, but I don't remember.
I don't believe that we have a clear answer. I think there's speculation, but I don't think we have a clear answer about like what was the drawing factor for these Denai Spren. And regardless of if we get a clear answer, I do think that the Denai Spren are not just at the whim of other people. They're making decisions.
Yeah, I think that's very obvious just from what we see with Maya, that although these Deadeyes are, for the most part, nonverbal and slightly above catatonic, but largely unresponsive, they have some cognitive function. They have decision-making power. They have some agency still. And so my guess would be that they have chosen to be here. Like, they have come here for a reason. It's not an accident.
And remind me if this timeline makes sense. There is the Recreants, the creation of all the Deadeye Spren, and then there is the Last Desolation sometime later.
The Recreants is after the False Desolation.
Okay, so Ba-Edo Mishram's activities at least introduce the possibility of the Recreants. And Maya's group, this group of Deadeyes that made a specific decision during the Recreants were at least influenced by the False Desolation and Ba-Edo Mishram.
Presumably.
And assuming also that their knowledge of her, capture and imprisonment as well.
Sure.
So, all of those things could have been influencing their decision.
Very speculatively,
yes, but then collects message about fixing what's wrong with Ba-Edo Mishram. What if there is a fix of Ba-Edo Mishram and a fix of the Deadeyes?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a good call, actually. From what we know, I believe that those things are linked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That there seems to be some type of blockage or some thing going on.
Changed something about the Nahel bond, I believe.
And the nature of Spren on Rashar. I mean, it's across the board.
According to Kalek, which,
he's crazy.
Magical maladies.
Magical maladies.
Let's not take him completely at his word. Okay. Last question. This one's a good one as well. Comes from The Burning Dusk. Quote, in Rhythm of War, why did the anti-void light not react with the racium and the dagger? End quote.
Brandon says, quote, I will raffo that for now. Good question, but yeah, there's some reasons there. End quote.
Brandon, I need to know the reasons.
Anti-void light seemingly should react with racium and any god
you
metal.
Would think that it would still be conducted by the racium, since that is the property. Although, I guess that's the thing, right? Racium's property is to conduct investiture. This is, I guess, not investiture. It's anti-investiture. So I guess that's our answer. It's racium inert, I guess, because it is not investiture. It's anti-investiture, whatever that is. I feel like this is talking about the same thing as talking about dark matter.
Yes, 100%.
Where it's just like, it is a thing, but what is it? We don't know.
We have no concept of what it is. I feel like they have actually a better idea of what anti-void light is.
I mean, at least they can make it on demand.
Exactly. We can't do that. We don't even know what it is. It's just like dark because we can't see it.
Yeah. I don't know.
I believe that there are a lot of questions specifically when it comes to racium and anti-void light or anti-investiture in general. My big question regarding that is if it will be used, or if the discovery of a way it can be used is like the key defining factor. Like, what if an unchained bondsmith is able to channel anti-investiture in the same way they can channel investiture from the spiritual realm and create like a super bomb?
Oh.
You know, something truly horrific or truly cataclysmic is possible because of like a merging of investiture and anti-investiture. There's a lot of, you know, bomb potential there. Of course, it could be anything.
Yeah.
These are the words of Brandon Sanderson.
With some bonus words of Isaac.
And a lot of commentary and speculation from us. We appreciate you being along here. We are looking forward to our upcoming 100th episode of the podcast. Thanks so much.
Can you believe we've done 100 episodes of this?
Far more than 100 episodes if you join us on Patreon, where there's extra special bonus episodes. This has been a great time. We appreciate all of you. We'll be back for our 100th episode in 2 weeks.
Life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.